Welcome everybody. This is the Art of Advocacy live Facebook show. If you are here with us live, feel free to hit the share button and you can share this video on your own Facebook page, or if you belong to a group on Facebook, you can share the video with your group. So tonight is going to be all about how to advocate for inclusion for your child in your child's building. So let's see. I don't know if I see us live. If you can hear and see us on Facebook right now. Oops, there we go. I see one person here with us, so yay. Looks like we're all together. But tonight I'm going to be giving you 9 ways to advocate for inclusion. Now, the plus sign means that I'm counting on you as our viewers to come up with additional ideas of things that you've tried that has helped your child be included in general ed, or ideas that you've heard from friends or read about. But we want to add as many tools as we can to our toolbox for advocating for inclusive education for our kiddos. So if you don't know me, I'm Charmaine Thaner, and I'm a parent. I have an adult son who has disabilities. He happens to have Down syndrome, so I had to learn as a parent how to advocate for him. I'm also a retired teacher, so I understand how the school system works. And I've put these perspectives together, and now I'm an advocate for families and students. So I'm excited because I'm a firm believer in inclusive education for students. Our son Dylan was fully included from preschool through college, and we just saw so many benefits, not only for him, but for his classmates and our community, that this is something that I really encourage parents to join with the school people and see how the supports and services can be brought to your child and they can be successful in the classroom. So when we do these Facebook Live shows, it is a lot more fun and engaging if you can be interactive. So even if you're watching the replay, go ahead and post comments and questions, because I'll come back and answer those. If you are here with us live tonight, let's start out by doing a yes or no activity. So what I would like you to do is, if your child is included in general education classrooms, go ahead and type in a yes in the comment box, and also give the name of the state where you live. If your child isn't included yet in general education classrooms, go ahead and type no, and also give me the name of your state. So I think it will be interesting to see, one, from where everyone is from watching our video, and also to see if we notice any patterns of states or places where more students are included. The one caution I give families is, as an advocate, I often have people call me and say, well, what's the best district in this state to go to if I want my child included? And what we find is it really depends on a number of factors. Probably one of the most important factors that inclusion depends on is who the building principal is. So a school district might get a reputation for being very positive and very inclusive. However, if you're in a different building in that district, that may not be the case. So I think as parents, we always have to be prepared for advocating for inclusive education for our kiddos. So you might be wondering what my definition of inclusion is. The inclusion, I think, means a lot of different things to different people. One of the definitions that I really like is from this book that was edited by Phil Smith. And the book is called Whatever Happened to Inclusion? And in here near the beginning of the book, there's a definition of inclusion by Michael Giangreco. And it's a rather long definition, so I'm not going to read that tonight. But after I do this live show, I'll be repurposing the information into a blog post. So in the blog post, I'll include Michael Giangreco's definition of inclusion. He is not only a wonderful special education professor, but he's a cartoonist. You might remember this cartoon that we had last week in our show about accommodations, the island in the mainstream. So Michael Giangreco is the one that did this cartoon. And like I said, in my blog post, I'll include his definition of inclusion. If you're not currently on my email list, just type in the comment box blog posts, and I'll make sure that I give you the link for that. But let's look at that first strategy out of our 9 different strategies tonight for how you can advocate for inclusion. This one is to find allies, because I think you probably know by now that it's really challenging for parents to make change all by themselves. When it's only one person, one parent asking for a change in what the school district is used to providing, it's very easy for the schools to dismiss you and not listen to your request. If there's a couple parents that are asking for change and want to see inclusive education brought to their building, it makes it a little bit harder for the school to deny those parents. And when you have a larger group, when it's not just parents of students with disabilities, but when you find allies in the community, if you have a local college, go to the college's education department and see if there aren't some professors there that also believe in inclusive education and would like to help you champion that cause. But the idea is to make sure that you're not just the special interest group of only parents of kids with disabilities, because that's another way that they can dismiss you and say, oh, that's just a special interest group. So the more allies that you can find in your community, the better. Of course, if you can find teachers and therapists that believe in inclusive education, that is a wonderful plus for you, and that will really help create more change quicker in school districts. So our first advocacy tool for advocating for inclusion is to find your allies. The second strategy that I encourage you to use is to develop a marketing plan. Now, this may sound a little funny for like, what? I'm a parent, you want me to be an advocate, and now you want me to be a marketer. But I think, so often parents have been in the position where they've used things like, arguing it or bringing up different, regulations or statutes from the federal IDEA law, or they talk about what the definition of least restrictive environment is, or they bring in inclusion articles. And sometimes that works, but often that's not enough. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you develop a marketing plan. And as a marketer, you have to think about the people that you're going to be trying to convince or trying to engage in a discussion about a change that you're asking for. And in this case, the change would be that you want students to be included in general education classrooms. So as a marketer, you're going to have different stakeholders that you need to have conversations with and develop relationships with. So one group of those stakeholders would be your school board, or some districts call them the board of trustees. And you have to think about what angle or what, position are those school board members going to have about a change and asking for inclusion to happen in their district. Most often, school board members are concerned about cost because, they have a finite budget that they have to deal with. And so if you know ahead of time that one of their objections to things might be, oh, I don't know, I've heard that inclusion costs a lot of money, and it doesn't, but that might be something that they're concerned about. So in your marketing plan, when you have kind of outlined the different groups that you're going to be contacting and making those connections with, for school board members, you want to look at some research and what it says about the cost of inclusion, and bring that information to the school board. Then if you look at building administrators like principals, and when you're trying to talk to principals about a change and how they usually do things in their building, the principal will probably be concerned about cost, but also test scores, because we know in this day and age a lot of administrators and teachers are evaluated on their test scores. So when you're talking with those people, those, as we know in this day and age, I have a lot of my phone going up too high here. So welcome to Erica. I'm glad you're here with us, Erica. She's like one of our people that is always with us on Thursday nights. So yay for Erica. And she says yes, that her son is included in general ed, and she's from Idaho. So I love to hear that, good things are happening in different states. So if you just joined us, what we asked at the beginning was yes or no if your child was included, and the name of your state. So if you're watching the replay, or Marion, hey, thanks for coming. What we were asking people to do was type in yes or no if their child's included and what state you're from. So thanks for being here, Marion. We talked about the first strategy, which was to find your allies. Our second strategy was to develop a marketing plan. And when you talk to school board members, you're going to probably want to talk about the cost and help them understand that inclusion really isn't going to be that much more costly. And you want to talk about the benefits of not only for students with disabilities, but also for students without disabilities. When you talk to building principals, one of the things that they might worry about are test scores. Are their building test scores going to go down if there are students with disabilities included in general education classrooms? And again, there's research showing that doesn't happen. Actually, there's some studies that have shown that test scores increase. And I think one of the reasons that might happen is because when we have students with disabilities included in our classrooms, I think it makes teachers better teachers. So all the students benefit from that. When you're developing your marketing plan and how you're going to, talk with different stakeholders, another group that you want to focus on are teachers. And often there's a fear that comes from teachers, especially general education teachers, when you talk about inclusive education and how students with disabilities are now going to be included in their general ed classroom. And most often the general ed teachers are concerned because they don't feel like they have the skills. They didn't go to college to be a special education teacher. They feel very nervous and unsure. And like all of us, when we're doing something new, it can be scary and we're trying to figure out all the details. So for teachers, you want to look at how we can make sure we incorporate some training and some coaching for the teachers. I think what helps from the parent's point of view is to have a conversation with the teacher and to tell them, you don't expect everything to be perfect. Share stories of, things that have happened in your house when you didn't know what to do and you tried your best. And I think if parents are realistic with teachers and say, we're in this together, and if something comes up that, you feel uncomfortable with or you're not sure about, let's sit down and talk. So if parents understand that the teachers aren't going to have everything run smoothly from day one, and give the teachers that permission ahead of time to make mistakes and learn from them. I think that calms some of the teachers' fears. So when you're doing your marketing plan, the other thing that you might want to look at is community support, because the more support you get from outside, just parents of kids with disabilities, is going to have an impact on how quickly you can have change. So if you can bring in, professors from colleges, like I mentioned before, or other influential community members to come on board with you and to have those discussions and conversations, that can be really helpful. So let's look at our third strategy. Oh, and before I do that, Marian says yes, all right, that her child is included. And guess what? She's from Idaho too. So, all right, way to represent Idaho tonight. Thanks, guys, for being here. But our third strategy is to serve on existing committees. Now, often what I see is parents of kids with disabilities will say, well, we should form our own PTO or our own PTA and just have it for parents of kids with disabilities. And then we as a group can advocate for the change that we want to see. And although that seems probably logical that you want to band together, I think oftentimes that can be counterproductive because, when you come together as a group only representing parents of kids with disabilities, oftentimes the school will discount your voice because they say, oh, that's just a special interest group. That's the only thing that they're interested in is their own child. But when you use the strategy of, volunteering and deciding to serve on existing committees. So look at like I said, if you've got some kind of a parent-teacher organization, or there's a district accountability committee that you can serve on, all of those kinds of things will show that you are really interested in every student's education in the district, not just your child. But when it's appropriate, then you can make sure that you bring up that voice of, let's remember students that are typically marginalized, and how can we create change so they can be more successful at school. So as I said in the beginning, I'm going to share with you 9 tips for advocating for inclusion, but the 9 plus comes in with, I'm hoping that our viewers will also share ideas. So Erica or Marian, if you have things that have worked for you when you've gone to IEP meetings, or, what do you think helped to get your child included in general ed? If you can type those in the comment box, then, I think it's just so much more engaging that we get some other ideas. So as I continue on with some strategies that I've used, I'm hoping that you'll be typing in the comment box and sharing a strategy that you've used and that was successful. So our fourth idea for advocating for inclusive ed is to start a book or video club. And this, again, you don't want to invite just parents of kids with disabilities, but reach out to other parents and friends that you know from that building or from your community or from your church, and look at some books that have to do with great educational practices. If your group, isn't wanting to read a new book every month, instead, if they want a video, there's quite a few videos that you can either watch from YouTube, or you can buy your own copy of the video for, $30 or less. So if you're interested in some specific book titles or videos that I would recommend, just in the comment box type books or type videos, and I'll come back after the show is done, and I'll respond with some books that I think would be interesting for your book club, or some videos that you could show. You could show the videos at a parent-teacher meeting. You could ask the principal to show some of the videos at a staff meeting or an in-service day. So besides just your book or video club, you can use these as other resources too. As a matter of fact, some schools will have the parent-teacher organization purchase some books or videos that they can keep in the media center, and then teachers can check them out, parents can check them out, and that's a way that you can share those resources with other people, because we know the more you know about a certain topic, the more informed you are, the more knowledgeable, then usually that change is a little bit of an easier step to take. So we want to make sure that we supply that information for folks that are going to be initiating that change. So the fifth idea that I have for you is to, again, look at what kind of school reform you can advocate for and changes that you can make. And before I go into this, I noticed Marianne's comment, so let me share that with you. And Marianne says, including my child at the meeting, I love it, and having her voice heard helps get the team on board. It's harder for the team to dismiss the needs, the goals, when the student is the one advocating for themselves. And yes, I think that's tremendous. So thanks so much for sharing that. And you're right on. I really encourage parents to have their kids at IEP meetings. And sometimes you just have to figure out how exactly that's going to work. Some parents will have kids come at the beginning of the meeting where you're talking about strengths and interests and maybe what some global goals are for the next school year. Other parents, and their child feel comfortable staying for the whole IEP meeting. But it's true. I think when the student is sitting there, it becomes more real. It's not just like, oh, this is another meeting and we're checking off the boxes and we're writing some things down. But no, this is the actual kid that this IEP is about and for. So I think that's an excellent idea, Marian. It is really hard for districts to say no when the student is there and asking for that chance to be included in general education classrooms. So that's a wonderful strategy to add to your advocacy toolbox. And as far as calling for school reform, sometimes parents have been more successful getting inclusive education in their district by not even saying the I word, not even saying inclusion. Because sometimes people have this emotional reaction when they hear the word inclusion, and almost, right at the beginning they might be closed-minded about, oh, that can't help, that can't work in our district, that can't work with these kids, or something like that. So instead, if you approach it from another viewpoint and say, let's look at research-based strategies for instruction of all students. And the one that I really think is valuable for classrooms is the concept of universal design for learning, UDL. And I did a couple of videos on universal design for learning probably several months ago. But if you're interested in that, you can just type in UDL and I'll give you the video link for that. But universal design for learning is so awesome, I think, because it's a research-based instructional framework, and it's really being adopted by more schools and districts around the country. And basically, there's three parts of the framework. One is that teachers learn a variety of ways to present information. So if you saw our video from last week, that was one of the accommodations that we talked about. So instead of just doing a lecture or instead of just reading a textbook, for the teachers to have a variety of ways that they can help students learn the information. That's one way that you can gain inclusion, and students with disabilities can be successful in classrooms if teachers make those kinds of adjustments. The other part of UDL is having a variety of ways for students to respond, for them to show the teacher what they've learned. Again, that was one of the accommodations that we talked about last week in our video. And then the third part of universal design for learning is how we engage students. And oftentimes I think this is a part that's really forgotten, but is so important to make sure that kids are motivated and find learning fun and enjoyable. So when we're trying to engage students, one of the best ways to do that is to find out what kids are interested in, what their strengths are, and then to teach them new things through those interest areas. So again, if you're interested in UDL or how to identify your child's gifts and strengths, just let me know in the comment box, and we have some previous Art of Advocacy shows about those topics that I can connect you with. And then Erica has a comment, so let me share Erica's comment. She says, or a question, how would you include a student that has PTSD and doesn't like when the staff automatically talks about the negative? And that is a challenge because, the attitude that the staff has and the culture of that classroom, it's so easy for other students to pick up on that. And it's very difficult for a teacher or a paraeducator to hide, what their true feelings are about working with that student, or if the teachers or the paras feel comfortable with bringing supports and services to the classroom. So what can really make a difference sometimes, I think, is trying to develop those relationships with the staff. And again, allowing them to know that you want to work as a team and that you have some things that have worked at home that you would love to share as tips and say, this may or may not work at school, but I still would love to share these ideas with you. And I'm also really open to what you guys have found at school that's been helpful. So there's that give and take between the parent and the student. But if you notice, as much as you try different strategies and things still aren't, a positive climate in that classroom, and it really is triggering your child with PTSD, then I think you need to, move beyond that discussion and conversation with the teacher and the para and go up that channel of them talking to the principal. It could be something that you bring up at an IEP meeting. And, you just have to be careful. Teachers are always going to say, staffing is an administrative issue, not an IEP team issue. So instead, what I found is if you can talk about what your child needs, and I think it's appropriate to say he needs adults that are going to be positive, that use positive behavior supports. He needs adults that are going to tap into the way that he learns best, and describe what your child needs, and then ask the principal or ask the IEP team, where can we, find, do we have staff in our building now that can meet that child's needs? But it becomes a very sticky topic of discussion when parents are going to be asking for a change of staff. But it's something that you can do. It's often not something that's going to be quickly resolved, but for sure, especially for kids with PTSD, you don't want them being with people that are going to be triggers for them. So let me see. We also have Amanda. Yay, Amanda I know she's from Virginia. And so, Amanda, what we asked at the beginning was to see if your child, and I know Amanda has 2 kiddos, if they're included and what state you're from. And I already blew your cover and said you're from Virginia. But so join us and type in Amanda. I know one of the things that she's looking for is increased inclusion for both her son and daughter. So let's go back. We were talking about school reform. The next strategy that you can use for advocating for inclusion for your child is to come from it from a different angle, to look at the social justice aspect of inclusion. Like I said, a lot of times parents will concentrate on what IDEA says, how least restrictive environment is defined. And we can get caught up in what the law says, what the regulations say, and that can be important. But I think sometimes if we switch and we look at this as a more humanizing topic, that it's really about civil rights, social justice, sometimes we'll find either teachers or administrators that understand that aspect of education, and they would be more willing to provide change and support you in helping your child be included in the general ed classroom more. So just sometimes that little bit of a switch and bringing it up from a different angle can make a difference when you're advocating for change in your school. Now, the other one that is really interesting that I really appreciate is this concept of least dangerous assumption. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this before, but I think it was in 1984, Anne Donnellan talked about this least dangerous assumption. And what it is it's talking about how we need to get away from looking at differences as a deficit and instead appreciating it and knowing that all of our kids have abilities, skills, that they all show intelligence in different kinds of ways, that they're competent. Their background experience can be very rich, and that can be brought into the classroom. A lot of our kids are experts and have this fascination on certain topics. That can be brought in and recognized as a value in the classroom. And for us to always presume that our students are competent, and capable of learning and capable of reaching higher expectations. So the whole concept of least dangerous assumption is based on, like I said, some work from previous people in the 80s. There have been some other articles written about least dangerous assumption. And when I do my blog post about this video and turn it into a blog post, I'm going to be sharing in the blog post the links for those articles about least dangerous assumption. So if you're not on my email list, if you're watching the replay and you don't subscribe to my blog posts, go ahead and type in blog posts in the comments and I'll make sure I give you that link. But the blog post should be coming out this Saturday. So if you are on my email list, you'll get that blog post on Saturday, and in there we'll go into more discussion about the least dangerous assumption. Now, the last 2 strategies that we're going to talk about are common ones that are used. So, Amanda, what we're looking for, if you can share with us a strategy that you've used in the past to get, either one of your kids more included in their general ed classrooms, if you can share that in the comments, and then I can read that and share it with all the people online. And hopefully we'll learn a new trick or 2 from Amanda about inclusive ed. But let's look at this 8th strategy, and that's using the legal terms. And again, I said that's a common one. And it can be very effective because we do have a federal law, we do have state regulations, we have federal regulations, we have court cases that all point to, the spirit of the law is that students are included first in their neighborhood school and the age-appropriate classroom that they would, be enrolled in if they didn't have a disability. So knowing those laws in court cases can be helpful. I do have this free ebook that I just published, and I'll put the link in our comments, but it talks about the latest case from the Supreme Court, which was a case from Colorado. It was Andrew F. versus Douglas County Schools in Colorado. And so the book that I wrote was based on interviews that I've had. We had an interview with Jack Robinson, who was the attorney for the family. That's one of our previous Facebook Live shows. And we had an interview with an attorney in Connecticut that gave us her interpretation of the case and then research that I've done. So anyway, that court case, I think it will impact kids. And Pete Wright from Wright's Law talked about how there are certain things in that latest Supreme Court case that point to making sure that schools understand that, the least restrictive environment and that concept is very important when we're looking at placement for our kids. So the legal aspects can be very important to look at. Our 9th tip, we got a drum roll here, is sharing research-based studies. And again, this, I think, in the legal strategies is probably one of the 2 most common ways that parents use to advocate for inclusion. And I think research-based strategies are very important. And there are a number of websites that have compiled a list with links of research-based studies. So again, in this week's blog post, I'll be putting links in there. And especially if you have people that say, well, what's this all about? And I just hear these, personal stories about inclusive education, but I don't see any evidence that it really works. Those might be the people that you want to share these kinds of research-based studies with to show that, one, yes, it benefits not only kids with disabilities, but it also benefits students without disabilities. And as I said earlier in the show, I think the more that we include students that are typically segregated, it makes us better teachers. So in fact, the strategies that we learn to use with kids on the autism spectrum or kids with Down syndrome or kids that are hard of hearing, those same strategies can be so helpful to other kids in the classroom. So I think when we ask teachers to, make some changes in the way that they're providing instruction or behavior supports, that we need to stress that it's not just to benefit this one student that's going to be included, but it really does benefit everybody in the classroom. So, Amanda, I don't see you typing in. Maybe she'll do that in a little bit, but I know Amanda's an awesome advocate, so I'm sure she has some tricks of the trade that she's learned as a parent and an advocate that I'm hoping she'll type in the comments and we'll be able to hear from her. So before we close our show tonight, I wanted to make sure that I tell you about next week, because next week, Thursday, April 27th, Dr. Julie Costin from Syracuse University is going to be our special guest, and I'm so excited. If you've heard Julie speak at a national conference, if you've read any of her books, she is just like a wealth of information about inclusive ed and how parents can achieve that for their kids in their own neighborhood school. And she has written so many books. This one I just grabbed tonight. I've got several of her books, but this one is called The Educator's Handbook for Inclusive School Practices. She's got one for principals, speech therapists, occupational therapists, and her books are just, what I like about them is they're real practical tips, and they're an easy read. I know some parents sometimes have bought copies of her books and given them to staff as, a gift. As I said earlier, sometimes PTAs will buy books that can be kept in the media center, and that can be a resource library for parents or staff members. But I'm so excited because Julie will just blow you away with all the awesome things that she'll be sharing next week. So Thursday, April 27th, 7 o'clock Mountain Time. Make sure you tell other people, share that information with your friends, and that will be a wonderful Facebook Live show that we'll have. So to end tonight, I wanted to share, these are some questions and some thoughts from Dr. Cheryl Jorgensen, who is one of the authors of that Least Dangerous Assumption article that I referred to at the beginning of our show. And one of the things that Cheryl points out is how important it is for us to look not only as families but as educators, as staff, to think about how we are treating students with disabilities, how we value them or we don't, how we create that sense of belonging in our schools, in our communities. And so I wanted to end tonight's show with a few questions that Cheryl says sometimes can be important for us to ask each other. So she says that those involved in education and the educational lives of students, not only parents and teachers, researchers, must always decide what our least dangerous assumption will be and whether we can live with the possibility of being wrong. She says, if we're not sure, we might ask ourselves, how would I want to be treated if someday I was unable to communicate or demonstrate my competence? How would I want others to treat my child if he or she were in the same situation? What do adults with disabilities tell us about their educational experiences and how they wish they had been treated? What does research tell us? What does history tell us? So as we close our show tonight, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for your continued advocacy for your child, because I know change is possible. And when we work together, we can make it happen. So again, thank you. I'm Charmaine Thaner. I look forward to you being with us next Thursday evening. And until then, take care.